Hi, everyone. I'm Kelly O'Horo, and this is Adaptable, Behavior Explained. Hi, everybody. I'm Kelly O'Horo. I'm your host for Adaptable Behavior Explained. And I came up with this idea to do this podcast because as a therapist, I just saw so many adaptations and behaviors that most persons find confusing or bothersome. And when I look at the roots of why people act the way they do, what I've learned is those adaptations make a lot of sense when you start to think about the reasons for them. And so this show is about that. It's about adaptation and why we act the way we act, even when some of those behaviors are confusing or don't make a lot of sense to us. And today's episode is, I think, really important for anybody who thinks about wanting to go through a healing journey or knows someone else that has been maybe avoiding their story and not wanting to deal with the trauma of their life, or their stories, again, feel too hard. And so this is really about facing your trauma or your history, going to counseling, going to do something to growth, and being brave and afraid at the same time. And something that I want you to think about is if you or anyone you know has ever felt the urge to run from your story, or you think about things that have happened to you that were bad and you find yourself going, that was in the past, it was a long time ago, I just want to be here now and I don't want to deal with the things that are over, they're done with. Maybe you've been through something painful or something you'd rather just keep locked away. And maybe you even tell yourself that you're fine, but deep down you know that there are parts of your past that you would do anything to avoid. If that's you, you're certainly not alone. Even sometimes people come to therapy and they are still saying that. And today we're going to talk about why avoidance is so common and what it costs us, and ultimately how we can gently plant seeds for our own healing and growth, even if we're not fully ready to dive in all the way just yet. We're also going to talk about how unfair it feels to have to do this work when usually we're dealing with things that happen to us that weren't our fault, and why courage often means that being brave and afraid at the same time is 100% necessary when we're going to dive into the pain of our past so that we can ultimately be our very best selves. So we're going to talk about why we avoid, and really hopefully change your perspective on the fact that it's not weakness. It's really a survival mechanism, and it's a natural response to pain. For many of us, the idea of revisiting our past feels super overwhelming and sometimes even dangerous. And we don't fully realize how much our avoidance is shaping our lives. Every decision we make is usually predicated in past learning, and until those consequences show up in our relationships or in our work or in our sense of self, in our beliefs of self, we don't necessarily find the urgency. I find it funny when I talk to friends or people that are single, they don't have partners or anybody who lives with them or anybody that's really interacting with them daily, and they say to me things like, I'm fine, I wouldn't need to go to therapy. And my answer to that is it's a lot easier to avoid therapy or growing when you're single and you're by yourself, because truthfully, you don't have anybody that's activating your unfinished business on the daily, and you're not having to navigate those experiences and relationships as often as someone who's in a family system of some sort. So let me give you an example of, place yourself in this example, or someone you might know, but let's say there's a young adult and they avoid thinking about a childhood trauma. They focus on school, on friends, on work instead, because it feels safer for them to just keep things life and kind of live more at the surface. Or maybe someone survived a painful breakup and refuses to talk about it. They insist that they're fine. They just want to do something else. And even as they notice themselves pulling away from new relationships, they avoid potentially the reason why that's happening in the first place. And sometimes the pain is so much from something much deeper, like that surviving a childhood sexual abuse or physical neglect or danger. And oftentimes, even years later, people can't bear to talk about what happened to them. Just the very idea of facing those memories feels like it could break them or crush them. And so I want you to just, practically think about a couple of things. Of course, I want to avoid pain. That's human. That is a natural propensity when we want to stay out of discomfort. And I want you to notice what feels unsafe about facing the past and really try not to judge it, because this is really a survival instinct. And then go ahead and practice some grounding skills, deep breaths, take a walk, or find something comforting in a routine like yoga or swimming. If you need more ideas on ways to manage distress from trauma, I've got an episode on that earlier in my list of shows, so check that out. But I really want to talk about the cost of avoidance that is sometimes not very obvious. Avoidance might bring short-term relief, but it's kind of like the phrase credit card parenting. If we do the easy thing now, we're going to end up paying more later. And the same thing goes with avoiding our trauma. And it can often lead to much greater pain in the long run, the longer we wait to address things. Unaddressed trauma can show up like anxiety, depression, struggles with relationships, or even physical symptoms or somatic distress that shows up in our body. And we may not see the connection until those patterns repeat over and over again. And sometimes the pain of the relationship patterns that we have is really profound. And I oftentimes have clients who will say, why do I keep ending up with someone like this who's unavailable emotionally, or really selfish, or so over-functioning they won't get off my back about everything, and why do I keep attracting that? And I think that that's a good question to ask yourself, because usually there's something unresolved or reenacted in a previous relationship that is showing up in your life now. Someone who avoids thinking about a difficult childhood finds themselves repeating old patterns in adult relationships, and oftentimes choosing partners who aren't safe or supportive, or really the ideal person one would choose on paper. And a person who never talks about loss finds themselves feeling numb, disconnected, unable to fully enjoy life. And they're those people that kind of live in the middle, in the gray area, where they've blunted their emotions, both protective and enhancing, because we can't allow for the full rainbow of emotions when we've got things squashed, and we don't get to pick and choose which emotions end up squashed. And so that gray way of living in the middle is it's not very exciting, because we don't have the full array of good, positive emotions either when we've smushed the protective ones. So let me go back to the example for a survivor of sexual abuse. For these people, avoidance might mean dissociating during intimacy, being in a safe, loving relationship now and not being able to, approach intimacy with freedom. Or maybe they have to work through the feeling flashbacks and the intrusions of thoughts with their partner before they can be present in the intimate experience with their partner, because they struggle to trust and they feel stuck in life in general. And that pain that they tried to bury just keeps resurfacing in ways that they never expected. And they may know that this is a problem, and they may even know what it's connected to, but just the idea of the fact that, one, it could be better, and two, to what I would have to face in order to have that happen is scary. So some other things you might consider is just gently asking yourself, are there places in your life where you feel stuck, or that you keep repeating the same patterns? And maybe use metaphors like, ignoring traumas, like leaving a monster in a closet. It doesn't go away just because you don't look at it. These things hide in plain sight when they are really actively being avoided. And you may not feel the effects now, but they often show up when you least expect it. Sometimes my clients will say things like, I don't understand why I get here and I just start crying, but I was fine all week. And what I tell them is your body is starting to create associations that when you're here, you've given yourself permission to feel, to go there, to, experience some of the things that you have to zip up and compartmentalize when you're not in therapy. And I want to tell you that that's a really normal occurrence too. And the more that you do that, the more your body starts to trust that you're handling it, and you don't have to keep it all zipped up anymore. But you are now in charge of when things come out and are triggering or activating. And then you can go live your life in the more functional way that you always do. Come back to therapy, pull it out. And so that becomes more of a pattern. So for those who are avoidant of wanting to do the work, that's something you can expect to happen. And that's actually a lot of freedom, because you're now empowered to take charge of when and where you deal with the activating events and the emotions that accompany that. If you're not ready to face your past, it's okay. Healing can't be rushed, but it helps to know what to expect so that you're not so surprised when old wounds show up later. Sometimes just having information or a gentle invitation is enough to plant a seed for your future growth. So maybe you're listening and you are thinking about some unhealed trauma that you know is affecting you now or might affect your future relationships, and you start to notice patterns in your own life. Maybe if they're a sexual abuse survivor and you're not ready for therapy, but you save some resources from some of our podcast episodes or other episodes and think of them and play them in like bites that feels right for your own timing. Maybe start some grounding exercises before you dig into your trauma on your own with potentially things like meditation or more calming exercise like yoga or things like that. Even those small acts of steps towards healing will help make the process easier for you when you do decide to really dig into your past. You really have to give yourself permission to go at your own pace. You want to learn about trauma, its effects, even if you're not ready to dive in, and that's okay. And tell yourself, like, I can come back to this when I'm ready. I'm allowed to take small steps. And for those of you who are right there, I'd like to invite you to check out a couple of my earlier episodes. Those ones are How We Work, parts 1 and 2. That'll give you some history on kind of just really the biology and neuroscience of trauma and how it might be affecting you while keeping it out at a little bit more of a distance and not so specifically deeply into your own personal work. So now I want to talk a little bit about something that comes up for people pretty regularly, which is the concept of how unfair it is that I have to go dig through all of this painful stuff when I'm not even responsible for having it like how it happened to me. And it really isn't fair that you've been hurt and that you have to do the hard work of healing. You didn't choose what happened to you. And it really is deeply unjust that the burden of healing and recovery falls on your shoulders. And I think naming that unfairness is a bit of an act of compassion for yourself because it really isn't fair. And pity is a synonym for compassion. And really, we have to feel bad for ourselves for things that weren't our fault so that that emotion can come through, be fully felt, and be resolved so that we can then move forward and just take care of the things that we need to take care of. Thinking about like a survivor of childhood sexual abuse and how angry they often are that they have to clean up a mess that, they didn't cause and someone else harmed them. That anger is really, really valid. Or even thinking about grieving a loss that builds up in you because you're dealing with the triggers from the way other people treated you. It's okay to acknowledge the feelings that it's unfair so that you don't end up in a lot of resentment. And so I think that really with lots of types of trauma, we start there. Like, this sucks. Why do I have to deal with this when it wasn't my fault? But the choice is really ours, because even though we didn't cause the things that happened to us, no one else can fix it for us. We don't have a time machine. We can't go back and change it. We can't have different parents or teachers or whoever caused our pain. It is what it is. And so for us to have the freedom we deserve and be in healthy relationships or have the peace that we deserve, really it is our empowered opportunity to face the things that keep us stuck. So again, it's okay to say, I shouldn't have to do this work, but I deserve healing. And allow space for that grief and anger and the unfairness to just be part of the healing process, so that you don't stay stuck where you currently are. I've often told people, we have choices. We don't have choices about what happened to us, but we do have choices as to whether we wake up in 10 more years with the same level of pain and stuckness and relational discord as we currently have. And that then is your adult decision to make. And that part's a little bit hard to swallow when you think about that. So when you think about healing from trauma, it does require a lot of courage, a lot of vulnerability, and the choice to face the past. It's not easy. It never really is. But it really is the only way to move from surviving to thriving. You don't have to force yourself to be ready, but you can offer yourself hope and a steady presence of what could come if you were willing to face that. So an example might be someone who, avoided their story. They return to it years later and they're ready to heal because maybe a seed was planted from something like this show, and they're having a moment of compassion in their life and they've decided, I think I'm going to go back and face this stuff. Or maybe, a sexual abuse survivor has decided after years of avoidance that maybe their partner deserves them to finally face this stuff so that they can be the right kind of person for their partner who's been, patient and loving and kind through the triggering experiences. And even though it's terrifying, it also can be the beginning of freedom while putting this backpack down and no longer carrying stones that you didn't put in your bag. Taking these small steps are really helpful. Maybe you start with journaling or just talking to somebody about what their therapy experience was like, or maybe you join a Facebook group and kind of listen as a distant observer about what things people have dealt with. And maybe you'll find that it's less scary than you had originally imagined. But I want to give you some mantras that might help. Things like I said before, being brave and afraid at the same time. You want to celebrate small steps towards those open opportunities and moments, even if you're not ready for the whole journey. And I want you to really remember that you've already survived the worst and you've already overcome that because of your resilience. And so healing is absolutely possible. So as a bit of a recap, avoidance is a survival strategy. It's not a character flaw. It's not a deficit. And if you're not ready to face your past, know that you're not alone. Healing is absolutely hard. It's not fair that we have to do it, but you deserve freedom from the past. And you can be brave and afraid as you take the next step. If this episode spoke to you, or you know somebody who seems like they might be struggling with something similar, please share this. And also, if you're listening, please subscribe. Something that we've noticed on recent checking out our analytics is that most of our watch hours actually are coming from people who haven't subscribed to the channel. So do us a favor, go ahead and click subscribe and help us out with that algorithm and become more known for a trusted resource for people that need information like this, just like you. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I really appreciate your attention, your courage, your bravery. And until we meet again, don't forget to lead with love. It'll never steer you wrong.